have the festival next month, as hopefully you've seen numerous emails and all kinds of stuff going out about it. We have a huge group of sponsors that you'll be seeing throughout the festival and other events that we'll post. We have our presenting sponsor, Country Club Bank, and we also have our photo booth sponsor, the two top levels, and that's Kellogg's. The festival is Thursday, October 7th, 3:30 to 6:30 at Cowpoint Park. Cowpoint Park is down in the southeast corner of Fairfax. It's where the two rivers meet. If you haven't been there, it's a beautiful area, and it has a beautiful, when the sun goes down, the downtown Kansas City, Missouri lights up, and we have beautiful photos from that. So, and Lavella is our photographer extraordinaire. I haven't seen her since last February in person in White House. So the festival, there'll be food, there'll be beer and wine. There's a lawn game tournament. You enter in teams of 2. You work your way up through brackets. If you win, if you lose, then you go grab a drink. And then we have like a championship playoff. There's between 2 teams, and whoever wins gets their name on the traveling trophy.
Elaine, can you hear me?
For like,
yeah, I can hear you.
You know, the
I
next
did
year.
respond to your post regarding the long trip.
So, my 2 nephews, one works for me and one works for my brother in Fairfax. They won in 2019, so that picture of them and the trophy's been sitting in our office, and they're very proud of it, but they need to be taken down. So hopefully everyone is ready to do that.
We have to do a few times anyway.
What else do I want to say? We have a VIP event. The plane's coming in October 4th. It's flying into the downtown airport. You can go see the plane between that Monday through Thursday. You can also buy air adventure rides for $425. They're more than halfway sold out already, I know. So there's a lot of airplane enthusiasts that are signing up for those. We're going to do a raffle at the end of the luncheon. The raffle tickets were $25. If you haven't bought one, this is your absolute last chance. And then we're going to draw the winner of that ride. And I have been talking so much about the festival the last few months. What am I forgetting, Kate?
Buy your tickets to come and have a big lunch.
Buy your tickets. If you haven't bought your tickets, if you're not a sponsor packets, get so many tickets. Then we sell, we put them at really low prices, the tickets, because this was started for employees of Fairfax. There's 10,000 to come have a good time at the festival. If you're a sponsor or you're an employee in Fairfax, the tickets are $10. That gets you into the festival, 2 drink tickets, and all the food. So it's a good deal. If not, it's $15. It's still very well priced. So get your tickets. And I do want to introduce, my bracelet just came up, Susan, who just walked in. That's pretty funny. So I have our festival committee. There's a few here that I'm going to introduce. And then also another group that's helping with the festival. So who here, Bev, is getting her food. Sorry, Bev is helping on the festival committee. We've got Corey over there with Corporate Mechanical. Bev is with Hope Garden Inn. We have Rachel Chambers, who's our treasurer for Fairfax, and also on the committee. Is there anyone else on the committee that I'm missing? Okay. Then I just wanted to introduce real quick Susan Contrell, who's over there. Is it Sterling Strategies?
Sterling Sales Strategy.
Sterling, I'll get it eventually. 3 S's.
You were close.
Yeah, so she's a member now, and you'll be able to find her information, but she has been a wealth of information and help in planning the festival and connecting and how you do things and keeping me on track. And then we have Kate, who, sorry to say about food, but you're with KL Communications, and she's kind of working in the back of the media for the festival. And I don't think Kelly is here yet.
She's on her way. She says it's backed up on the highway.
Okay, so Kelly Ziegler or Ziegler?
Ziegler.
Okay, she is numerical drink, and she is doing all the social media. So it's kind of fun. Never really pushed the social media and ads, but it's really getting out there and getting a lot of attention. And with that, I think I've said everything about Fairfax I need to say, right? So we know we have Dan Desko here today. He's with the B25 History Project. We also have Jim Stella, who works with him on the B25 History Project as well. They're at the festival every year. They're located here in Kansas City. We've got some of the people from Yankee Air Museum who owns the B25 that's flying in. And Dan will introduce them. And I'm turning it over. There you go. So, yeah, let's do the clapping. We forgot how to do it again.
All right, so now we get to start the presentation. So you guys get to, I'm looking at my camera, but you're up there, so it's just kind of weird. So I'm Dan Desko, B25 History Project. This is Jim Stella. The two of us actually started the B25 History Project some years back. Some of you may or may not know, I've done a presentation before. We kind of did some basics kind of thing. My grandparents actually worked at the plant. Jim actually was a crew member on a B25 for years and years and years. The last B25 that flew in Kansas City. I've got some people here with me. The presentation I'm about to do is actually very unusual. So I've got in-person people. We have people that are sitting on two different continents, one continent, two countries. A couple of my historians that actually, this is also the first presentation that I did that I didn't build entirely by myself. It took 3 historians to build this presentation. It's a great way to kind of show off what the B25 History Project is all about. We're able to gather people from around the world. We have a historian that's in the Netherlands and so on and so forth. We can utilize technology. We have a server database that all of our historians can actually log into, compile all their information. And we are able to get a huge amount of information about B25s and present it in these types of situations. So this is a great way to show off what we do. So let's see if we can get everything working here. We have David Lassant there. You can tell in the top center square. We have David. David actually is our RCAF and Royal Air Force historian. David lives in Canada. He's been a great resource for filling out the back third of this presentation. Sitting next to him, at least on our screen over here, is Jerry Lester. Jerry is the official, I guess, historian for the Yankee Air Museum. So he's up there with them. He's been doing research for years and years and years. We've actually known him for quite some time. I actually got to meet him a few years back at a couple events in the same year. He's a great guy. We have another one of our historians down here. That's Mike Laney. Hi, Mike. Mike is officially our combat historian. He actually was the historian for the 57th Bomb Wing for a while, which they basically did North Africa, Mediterranean, those kind of things. Very knowledgeable about those airplanes in that area, which actually is where Rosie's Reply actually got her combat history, was with the 57th Bomb Wing. Then we have this lovely person in the smack middle of the screen there. She is going to be the pilot. You're going to be the official pilot, right, Glenn? If you, which we can't hear you quite so well. Are you unmuted, Delane?
Myself and Mike better.
Yeah, so it's you and Mike are going to be the pilot and co-pilot that'll be flying here. So she's actually one of the pilots. Next to her we have my friend of a very long time, Allison, who I met actually doing a Rosie event here in Kansas City when she came in. Was that the first time we met, Allison, I think it might have been? Are you muted?
Sorry, I feel like we knew each other from before that.
It might have been.
Maybe first time in person or something. Who knows?
It may have been. We all know. Did I miss anybody? Who else is out there? All right. So here's what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and drop this down so I can pull up the presentation here real quick. And I'm going to start doing the presentation. Let me share the screen so you guys can see it here. Hang on. Share the screen. Share the screen. Almost have it. All right.
Hey, by the way, when you turn your head down, you're all back here.
Okay, so don't turn my head is what you're saying? Okay.
Too much.
All right, I'm gonna move you guys down here so you don't interrupt anything on our end, but you guys can see the presentation, correct? Hey, Mike? Mike, can you see the presentation right now? Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of ignoring you a little bit on the screen, so I moved you guys off screen so we can see. All right, so as I said, this was actually written by, we've got the other two historians, Mike and David are here with us. And of course, I did the first piece to it. So Rosie's reply has kind of a complicated history, as most B-25s do. That's okay. We've got it all sorted out, and we're going to kind of go through some of that here as we move along. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. Let's do it the hard way. There we go. Technology is great. Okay. So let's start off with how Rosie's reply kind of came about. Now I'm going to do a little bit of review for the people that weren't at my previous presentation. So she was a B-25D model. It was one of the first models that we built here in Kansas City. But just to kind of go back a little bit farther than that before we started building them, the first roughly 180 airplanes were built and used as trainers. And we also kind of sold them to other countries for Lend-Lease issues. With the exception of the Doolittle Raid, none of those airplanes ever saw combat with the United States Army Air Force, okay? We did not consider them combat ready. They were, only reason why is because they didn't have as much armament on them and they didn't have as much armor, so they didn't protect the crew quite as well as some of the later models did. So the first one that we actually used in combat was the CD model, and I call it that way on purpose because the C and the D were, on paper anyway, for the most part, they were exactly the same airplane. The C's were built in California, the D's were built in Kansas City. There was some exceptions to that as they kind of rolled along. The later model D's are way different than any C that was ever built. But for the most part, they were pretty much the same. And it was, as I said, it was the first one that the U.S. considered combat ready. So a little interesting little tidbit of that particular model and some of the earlier models as well is they had a ventral or a lower turret. They had a turret underneath it. Now this particular turret, if you get into the technicalities of it, was able to be remotely operated, but in this use it wasn't. You actually had to physically be touching that turret in order to operate it. It was operated through a periscope, which made everything you were looking at upside down and backwards. That's what you were shooting at. Upside down and backwards airplanes. It was not very popular. It also had some other issues. It was actually retractable, so it could actually pull up into the fuselage, which made it more aerodynamic. But the mechanism that did that, every time they landed on grass fields, which we did a lot early on in the war, it threw grass and dirt and mud up on the underneath side of that aircraft and tended to jam that mechanism up. So they got to the point where they'd get stuck quite frequently. The pilots didn't like them down because it created a lot of drag, and of course that ran into issues with fuel and all those other kind of stuff. Nobody liked using them. They were pretty much hated, and quite commonly they were removed just because they were useless. Going to move on a little bit. We also see out in the field, we see a lot of more kind of emphasis on forward firepower. And this is something we see all the way through B-25 production, from the first one to the last one. They wanted more and more guns to point up front. Obviously, point and shoot, right? It's the easiest way to hit a target is to shoot it with some guns. So, most popular person that we can talk about is Pappy Gunn. There were other people that kind of did some experiments with it, including North American, that they ended up putting more 50 caliber machine guns up in the front of this aircraft. So it was something that was commonly done in the field and also in development. Just to give you kind of an idea of something that North American played with, this is a picture of a wing pod that was tested by North American for use on the B-25, but was never put into play. The reason was it was very difficult to load and to operate and stuff like that. There were just better ways to do it. So, North American Aviation, kind of in conjunction with people out in the field, developed a new design. They were going to remove that lower turret. They were going to replace that with the waist and tail gun. The reason was when we removed that lower turret, then we create a vulnerability in the back half of that aircraft. So we can fix that and actually fix it quite well by putting in tail guns as well as what become the waist gun positions. We'll see those in a second. To increase the forward firepower, they're going to move the rear turret forward because now they've got the rear of the aircraft taken care of. We can spin that front turret now around to increase forward firepower, as well as adding cheek guns on the side below the cockpit, 2 on either side. So this would result in increased forward firepower, and they would be able to keep the rear defended and get rid of that stupid lower turret that everybody hated. So that actually is very familiar, should look very familiar, because that's the design that we went with the B-25J. Now the interesting thing is we were in the middle of D-production. So let's talk about where we were right when they made this decision. So the Kansas plant was about halfway through their contracted B-25D production. Inglewood had already completed their contract of Cs. They had moved on to Gs. So let's talk a little bit more about some specifics. We have this young lady in the bottom who's got a little screwdriver there. Her name is Iris Mahone Clemens. You can see her here. She's actually putting on a bladder that's part of the de-icing on the front of a B-25D wing. So that's Department 19, Wing Subassembly. We have this gentleman here. His name is Al Bry. I had the privilege last year of interviewing him. At this time, he was working in Center Section Subassembly, Department 31, as a riveter. This is my grandmother who worked at the plant. She was an inspector number 457, if you're curious. She worked in Department 54, and this is what she wore to work every day. It's actually my grandparents' house there. She was kind of showing off before she went to work there. My grandfather always worked at that time, but I could go on for the next 30 minutes about people that worked there. We'll stop it somewhere. So what happened was North American Aviation, Fisher Body, who was building a lot of the body panels, and the United States government had this big conversation in letters. We have most of the letters, digital copies of those, so we could read them, know what they say. So in that series of letters, they had a big conversation, and I'll summarize it for you. Basically, the government said, we want J's now. And both North American and Fisher went, no. You've got us contracted, we've got stuff built, it's just not feasible to switch it over that fast with all the bits and pieces and throwing it all out. It's not economically, it's not the smart thing to do. But North American said, we've got an idea where we can give you what you want and still make things happen. Always about creating the solutions, right? So they created a rework station, and this is before assembly ever began. And they said, we can make changes to the rear fuselage, basically the Fairfax windows. They're called Fairfax windows in this particular application because it was done in Fairfax. We're going to eliminate that lower turret. We're just going to do what we've got to do structurally to make it go away. Then we're going to put those parts on the assembly line. Now, in the assembly line, when we're there, we're going to do the modification and installation provisions for a tailgun canopy. We're going to call that a cupola from now on. And I'll explain why later. But that's a picture of what one of these modified B-25s looks like from the rear. You can see a canopy that looks very much like a J does. It is different, but looks very much like a J does. And you can also see a 50 caliber machine gun sticking out of the rear of it. So that's what they were kind of moving towards. And in the modification center, we're going to fabricate the gun mounts that we need to fabricate. We're going to add those cheek guns on. We're going to tidy everything up in the modification center. This is actually a photograph of the Kansas City Modification Center doing that work on a group of late Model Ds. So you can see kind of the finished product here. And you can see the top turret is in the rear. That is one of the clues that tells us this is a D aircraft. If you look carefully, you can kind of see on the side, you can see windows on some of them. You can see the gun sticking out the back. Most of these you can't really see whether or not there's a tail canopy from this, the way this angle is, but that's okay. We did the work for you. So we gathered all the photographs we could of all these late Model Ds that we could, and we found that 100% of them had the lower turret removed. So that was something that definitely had to go. We noticed that only 94% had Fairfax waist windows, and only 82% had that tail cupola and the tail gun on there, which means we don't know. We're suspecting there may have been some production kind of slowdowns or some manufacturing issues or something. We're not 100% certain, but we know that not every aircraft got the modifications that they intended. So we go on, we can kind of look at this. Now you'll notice there's a machine gun hanging out the back, but there's no tail cupola. This is kind of a secondary modification. We do know that some of those aircraft were actually done at City Ahmed, which is an air depot that was set up to do some of these modifications as well. They did them differently. They didn't have access to the tail cupola and stuff like that. Basically what they did is they cut out the existing sheet metal, put in some plexiglass, did some little rework to throw the gun in there. The difference between this and one that was modified in Kansas City is the gunner here that's shooting in that is going to be prone. He's going to be laying on his belly. There's no room for him to do anything but. In Kansas City, we had a little room over your head, so you actually knelt in front of the gun when you were firing. So a little bit better visibility, but the same was accomplished. Most of these aircraft we see actually in the 57th bomb wing. So we're back to that picture again. Let's talk about the Kansas City mod center. Let's talk about that tail cupola. As I kind of mentioned, we think there was some sort of a manufacturing issue, but the best we can tell it was resolved by late 1943. Let's call it December, which just happens to be when Rosie's Reply was built. We also noted, as I said before, the tail cupola and the Kansas City ones, you're able to kneel, not necessarily lay down, so it makes it a little more comfortable for them. Now, I've got a picture here that kind of like, so the question becomes, since we know that Rosie's Reply was a late Model D, what should she look like? Which modification did she go under? Now, we can see, obviously, today she's got Fairfax windows. We can look at those. We can see those. So that's easy enough. So let's look at her tail gun position. Interestingly enough, on the far left, you see circled in blue for the people here, this little thing right here. Kind of hard to see here, but if we blow that up really big, you're going to see something that looks kind of like a trailer hitch. It looks an awful lot like you see this picture here. So obviously this is a color picture, and you can see some people in the background. This is actually, I took this in the back of Rosie's Reply at one of the events that I had the chance to kind of play with her in. And this is actually what got me thinking, why is there a trailer hitch in the back of a B-25? It took me later finding a combat picture of a B-25 that had been shot up to realize that is the remains of the gun mount. So that is one of the modifications that was made in Kansas City, which means Rosie's Reply probably had a tail cupola as well. So here's her new paint job, all nice and pretty. So let's talk a little bit about her and what, specifically about that particular airframe, okay? So she was accepted by the United States Army Air Force on December 17, 1943. That means she was completely built, completely modified, ready to go. The Army is like, mine, we'll take it. This is, minus the nose art, this is a lot of this is very close to what she would have looked like at that point, okay? She was assigned to the Caribbean Wing, or Caribbean, depending on how you want to pronounce it, of the Air Transport Command. Now these are the people that are going to transport this B-25 off to combat. And so she landed to get preparations for overseas in January of '44. So it took about a month to get her where she needs to go. There's her orders right there. There's the crew that flew her overseas in the lower left there. So she was originally allocated to the RAF when she was under production, but was then diverted by the time she was completed to the Army Air Force. But basically, the government, no, we want her. We're not going to get rid of this one. Wasn't just her, there was plenty of them. So, and she was assigned to the MTO, which would have been the 57th Bomb Wing. There were, in this particular flight, there were 12 B-25Ds, all about the same, probably looked just like her. They were all assigned to recently graduated combat crews, and they were going to ferry via the southern route. Nobody here knows what the southern route is. I've got you covered. This is the southern route. In the upper left over here, you're going to see where she started, which is in the southern United States. She flew down, across, up and over, up into the Mediterranean. She ends up landing at Cadiz Airfield Air Depot, Morocco, where she was assigned to the 57th Bomb Wing. So all the people that flew her over went on to the job that they were going to do wherever they were assigned. She stayed there at the air depot, kind of like waiting to be put into use. At the time, the 57th Bomb Wing had 3 bomb groups scattered across southern Italy and eastern Corsica. I'm going to delve off a little bit here, and I'm going to make Mike cringe a little bit, because now we're into the combat portion. We've ended at the factory. I'm the factory historian. So now we're moving into I'll let Mike correct what I mess up here shortly if I make any mistakes. Sorry, Mike. I'm apologizing up front. So she was accepted at the Cadiz Airfield Depot on January 22nd, 1944. So that's basically how long it took her to fly that route. And they flight tested her just a couple weeks later on February 5th. Now that's basically making sure that she's all still in one piece, nothing broke loose on the flight over, everything's okay, right? So she was stored there until she was needed. So let's talk about when she was needed. First of all, if you've seen pictures of her, she holds a 9C on her tail. Now that was the tail code designation that she held when she was in combat. She was not the only 9C. That's one of the big myths. Everybody thinks that that identifies an airframe. It does not. That only defines an airframe in one point in time. There were several 9Cs. She was the second. Let's talk about the first. And let's talk about the guy that was the crew chief for all of them. The first 9C was Ezra Baird. He was the crew chief actually for all 9Cs and actually all of the Cs, the C group. So it was the original it was an original aircraft, I should say, assigned to the 489th prior to leaving the U.S. So it was one that went over originally with that bomb squadron. It carried the names Talk for Joe and Ellen E. and Son. Now, if you've done some research because you want to know about this airframe and you've done some Googling, you've probably heard people refer to Rosie's reply as Ellen E. and Son. That is incorrect. That was actually this 9C. And we all know that, but a lot of people don't, and it was misrepresented for a lot of time in a lot of things that ended up in print. So, little tidbit of information, if you see it, just know it's wrong, different airplane, okay? And it flew, that particular airplane flew 86 combat missions and was severely damaged during Mount Vesuvius eruption in March of 1944. So in March of 1944, Mount Vesuvius erupted. We lost a lot of aircraft in that particular thing. There's some great pictures out there. I won't divert to that at the moment. But she was one of those airplanes that we believe that was lost and basically left there. So they needed a replacement aircraft. So they called the Air Depot and said, hey, send us one. It ended up being Rosie's reply. So I basically got that now. So here's a picture of Ezra, who was a crew chief. We actually have access to, and we've digitized his, he had like a little notebook that has every serial number that he was in charge of, and he listed everything that every engine that was replaced and so on and so forth. All of that information we have. So we know an awful lot about her mechanical history, which is pretty much bupkis. She wasn't around very long. We'll talk about that in a second. So we do know that Rosie's reply was, at the time, just another B-25D. She was assigned, and she flew in. She met up with them to Paestum, and then flew on with, and I'm going to mispronounce, but it's basically Corsica, on April 14th of 1944. So, essentially, Rosie's reply joins her bomb group in April of 14th, specifically of 1944. All right. She flew 8 total missions. This is one of her mission crews here. Also, contrary to popular belief, they did not have the same crew for every mission. Kind of want to point that out. The crews, and especially the 57th Bomb Wing, they have the same crew chief, but they did not have the same pilots, co-pilots, and so on and so forth. So there are a list of 8 total missions. There was one mission that she had a mechanical issue and actually didn't drop bombs. Everything else, this is what she did and where she did it. You'll notice the last one listed is May 4th of 1944. Just under a month, she ran 8 missions, which is not uncommon for that area. But May 4th, by May 4th of 1944, by mid-May, we had a bit of an issue. We had J's coming over. So they started replacing all the old D's with the J's that were being built. The J's looked an awful lot like the D's, but they were more heavily armed, more heavily armored, better all, overall, this is what the Army Air Force wanted in combat. So the D's pretty much went away. Some of them were sent back to the United States, some of them were sent to other bomb groups and used for administrative aircraft. Remember, it's a great aircraft to fly. Pilots love flying B-25s. As I'm sure a pilot can tell you, it's a great it's a fun aircraft to fly. I've heard it described as a fighter, but it's a bomber. So they love flying it. So they kept them around. They were very useful, and they used them mainly for administrative duties and stuff like that. In this particular case, Rosie's reply was sent back to the U.S. That's why she's still around. This is her crew that actually brought her back to the U.S. Because these people had, met their obligations and were actually flying back to the United States. Now, a couple notes that I will put on here. Due to the fact that she was only in combat for a month, she did not have any nose art that we're aware of in combat. That really wouldn't have been that uncommon. She would have had to have been around a while in order for them to fall in love with this airplane and have to paint something on it. The other thing is, we don't have any combat photos of her specifically that we're aware of. She would, number one, would be hard to identify without any nose art, unless we saw a tail code. And even the tail code doesn't tell us everything we need to know, right? Because there's multiple aircraft. So we don't know of any currently existing photos of her in combat. But we know she was over there. So she arrived in San Antonio Air Service Command in June 6th of 44. Now, I put the next little note in there because you'll notice today she doesn't have that tail cupola. Remember back in the beginning of my presentation, I mentioned that she probably did when she was manufactured. So it disappeared somewhere. And here's what we think happened. She was given back to the RCAF. Well, she was originally designated there to start with. But when she got back to the United States, there was a contract and they wanted late Model Ds for some training. And she was one of several that was prepped and set up there. We've seen the contract. We know that it says on there we don't want any armor or armament or anything like that. And we want them all to look the same. So we think at that point, since this one had a cupola and other Ds didn't, that cupola was removed as part of that preparation, if you will, for that transfer. Now we're going to move into today's portion, which is right here. By the time she arrives in Canada, this is actually a picture of her flying. This would have been early on. I don't know exactly when this photo was taken. But when she arrived on October 18, 1944, by then there was no tail cupola. So we think it disappeared here in the United States. She only had 156 hours on her airframe, based on the paperwork that it had, which is not uncommon. That's not a lot of hours for a B-25. But she was only in combat for a month, give or take. So that's not uncommon at all. She was one of 29 late Model Bs that were ordered. And so basically, again, they just wanted them all to be the same. They were just going to use it for training. So she gets bounced around a little bit up into in Canada and doing a couple of different things. She spent some time in storage in Canada in a couple of different places, and she also spent some time doing different types of training. B-25s were even used post-war in the U.S. as multi-engine trainers because they were such a great airplane to fly. These are all photographs of her when she was in Canada. She spent some time at Moose Jaw, which is, I just love saying Moose Jaw. It's just a great place. But she also spent some time in Alberta, so on and so forth. By February 47, so just a couple of years later, she's got 450, almost 460 hours. So the Canadians flew her a lot more than we ever did. Little oopsie. September of 1954, she had a little issue with her nose gear on landing, and this happened. That is not uncommon, actually, because of the way the nose gear was manufactured and the way it sits in the aircraft. Again, as the pilots will tell you, once you get them in the air, they're great to fly, but it's kind of a pain when they're on the ground. The newer models actually are better. The older models have been retrofitted with a new shimmy damper that actually resolves a lot of these issues. So problem fixed, but this is not uncommon for the time. So one of the last pictures we have, she was working on navigation training at a navigation school, and so on and so forth, did some ferry flights, and then was put on active reserve in '61. And the Canadian Air Force decided in February of '61 that they were going to dispose of this particular airframe. So what happens when an Air Force sells an airframe? Well, it ends up in the civil market, as we call it, or private market, if you will. And she actually doesn't have a huge civil record. Some B-25s, I could write 3 or 4 paragraphs on how many people owned and operated the B-25 over the years. She basically was sold to one guy, sold to another guy, and then Yankee Air Museum bought her. I mean, it's just that simple. She's been loved a lot by a lot of people. A great picture here of her kind of side view. It's an older picture of her and her gallant warrior. You can see the Fairfax windows right there, which is the window and the rear fuselage. You can see that she doesn't have, that's not a glass nose, which you saw the reason why earlier. So when she fell on her nose, they put this on her, which is actually an 8-gun nose. The reason they did that is there was a bazillion 8-gun noses in crates that were built as kits to modify B-25s after the war. They were all sitting in a warehouse. That's partly how we got ours, which we're restoring, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But it wasn't uncommon back then just to take one and bolt it on. They're a lot more useful back then as well. So in October of '88, she was sold to the Yankee Air Museum, and she flew for Yankee as Yankee Warrior like forever. Up until March of 2021, when this happened, she was repainted, actually the end of 2020, she was repainted in what we're going to call her combat livery. It's as close as we possibly could come to what she looked like back in the day. That is the correct color on top, that's the correct color on bottom. I don't have a picture of her tail back here, but the numbers on the tail are painted appropriately, so on and so forth. The one thing they did that probably didn't have back in the day was they painted the engine nacelle rings yellow. We think that happened a little bit after she left, so we think when she was in combat it probably wasn't painted. But the reason they painted it that way is to honor the combat group that she was in. Every combat group had a different color, so they painted her combat group's color on there. So very appropriate. They also painted the nose art to honor the however many tens of thousands of Rosies, that work, building these things. Not just these things, but every other thing during the war. So it's about as accurate as you can get. And then on top of that, they've added some really neat touches to honor the people, the men and women involved in her combat group and production and so on and so forth. So, as far as that goes, we're going to kind of open it up with questions, but before we do that, I'm going to kind of talk a little bit. I kind of mentioned a little bit about, as I try to find my WebEx feeds again. Hello. Technology is great when it works. My fingers are too fat. So anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about R8 nose. We're going to try to get these guys back up on the screen a little bit bigger. See how many people we got. Oh, I know what I need to do. No, I need to come up here and stop sharing my screen. Technology is great when it works. Stop sharing. I know there's a big button. There we go. Now I've got everybody up. All right, can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. So real quick, I'm just going to talk about our 8-gun nose restoration real quick, and then I'm going to bring you guys in. So I mentioned the 8-gun nose kind of for a reason. We have one. We're restoring it. We are actually restoring it to look like it did the day it rolled out of the Kansas City factory. The ones that were put on airplanes were done at 2 different places. One place was here in Kansas City. The other place was actually out in the field in some depots. I told you if there was one that had an issue with its nose in the field, they wouldn't put another glass nose on it unless they had one laying around. There was a kit that was built that had the 8-gun and everything you need. They just bolt the sucker on there. It dramatically increased the forward firepower. You have 850 calibers on it. If you leave the 2 cheek guns on either side, that's 9, 10, 11, 12. Turn the front turn around, you can get 1450 calibers shooting at you. Fill that full of armor-piercing incendiaries, and you can sink pretty much any ship that floats in one pass. I mean, it was an amazing thing. So there are quite a few 8-gun noses around. There's only been one other time, other than us, that an 8-gun nose has been attempted to be restored. And it's what's called a photographic restoration, so they basically made it look pretty. We're going for a historic restoration, which means everything in that is going to be as original as possible. We actually have most of the ammo boxes that we need that actually came out of them. Post-war, what happened was they were all gutted, used for other things. All of those bits and pieces were pitched. The reason nobody restores them is these parts are extremely hard to find. We've used our resources, our friends, the people that we know, to scour the globe, quite literally, to find the minutest little small bits and pieces that we can find. The overwhelming majority of that we have now. We are accepting sponsors and we are looking for corporate sponsors and that kind of stuff. We are going to have to manufacture a couple little pieces that are they're made out of what we call unobtainium, which means you ain't gonna get it. But other than that, that's how it works. When we're all done, we're building the stand right now. Jim is actually in charge of the restoration. Maybe after this, you guys can talk with him a little bit about how that's going. But we have all the metal on the way. Hopefully it's going to be here later next week, so that we can actually start building it. Our stand is modeled after the stand, one of the 2 stands that they use at the plant. We've incorporated a couple other little kind of neat little things in it so we can help tell the story. We're not a museum, we're a museum, and museum means we just put pretty stuff out there. We don't do that. In a museum, you learn something, and that's what we're doing. So we're going to tell a story about this. We're going to tell a story about the men and women that built it, and all that other kind of stuff. We're going to bring some Rosies to the Fairfax Fest along with this, and actually 2 of the Rosies that I think are going to be able to be there actually threw rivets in Rosie's reply, so they actually got a chance to do some work on her, so we're kind of proud about that. Also Al Bry, the one person that I put in the presentation as well, he's still alive, not healthy enough to make the trip. He lives a bit of a distance away. He also worked on the center section on this particular aircraft. So people that actually built it are still alive, and part of what we do is keep them connected to all of this. The other part that we do is we kind of encourage organizations like this to help us and to help the community to preserve that history. And then we do really cool things, like we have presentations that, I should have invited Wim, then we could have brought in the Netherlands. We have 13 historians right now that are working on collecting every single shred of history. We have over 40,000 items on our global database right now. The historians that we have are some of the most respected and well-known historians. I can't tell you how many books between us that we've written because it's a lot. Either we've written them or provided information for between that documentaries. I've done several documentaries and stuff like that. So with that, hopefully Mike and Dave, did I mess up too bad? Yes, I did. We'll talk later. Did any of you guys have anything that you wanted to say? Did any of you guys have anything you wanted to say to start with? I'm going to come down here.
It was an excellent presentation. I loved learning about everything.
Well, thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, there were some things that I didn't know about her. So I really appreciate you doing all the work and sharing that with us. That was really neat.
No, and I can't wait to feed you barbecue when you get here. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Yay! We're really excited about this trip. I can't wait.
No, it's awesome. What?
Hey, Dan.
Yeah, Mike.
So one thing to add, because I didn't see that slide before, where we had the orders of her when she came back to the States.
Yeah.
Pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Topaz, actually was the executive group commander for the 340 Bomb Group from its inception until that point, right after the air raid on Corsica, and he did his year and came back to the States. He also, when Colonel Mills, who was the original commander of the 340 Bomb Group, he was still in action less than a month after they arrived in theater. And he was also the commander of the 70th Bomb Group at the time the Doolittle Raiders were selected. And Colonel Mills obviously was part of selecting those crews, but he was still in action. So Colonel Topaz actually ran the group for a few months until his replacement came in. So it's kind of neat history that he flew Rose Supply back to the States.
Well, it's actually a good opportunity to kind of bring that in there, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And again, one of the things that we've done is there's another B-25 out there, which is actually the oldest B-25 that's still flying, Mishap. And kind of the cool thing about that aircraft that they were promoting, it was called Mishap because it was actually reconfigured to be Hap Arnold's transport during the war, and it was that's how it was flown. After the war, it was actually purchased by Howard Hughes, and there's some great green shag carpet in her to this day. And the museum that owned her was kind of promoting it as, you know, hey, look, Howard Hughes flew this aircraft. And it was funny because Lieutenant Colonel, actually now Colonel Dick Cole's daughter came to me when we were in Dayton, I think, and she looked at me and she said, you need to go talk to those guys. And I'm like, well, why? And she's like, they have no idea that Raiders flew that airplane. And there was a huge connection there. So I went over and I met the guys and we sent them a bunch of information and they've totally revamped their displays and everything. You know, just because not just telling the story is important, but telling the right story is important and including the right people. And that's a great little tidbit of information that I just learned. Which is the other cool part about the project is we have every other month I get all my historians on a WebEx like this and we just talk about a topic. And really it's just us educating one another, which makes us that much better at doing what we do. But it's really cool because all of us learn something. And we even had Jerry in on one a little bit, and it was kind of fun. I actually had to sit back and be quiet because I had nothing to contribute, but it was great.
Well, I tell you, I remember that. I'm the one that sat back and listened. First of all, I want to congratulate all of you involved with the project for the work that you do. It's just marvelous, the research. It's just been fantastic. And a couple of things. You had mentioned Colonel Tokaz that flew the plane back. When I started working, volunteering with Yankee, I started doing some research and, of course, right away found out the squadron before 89. Well, the 57th Bomb Wing is an association throughout the nation. And I had an opportunity to do a presentation on a plane at that time. And I actually had a chance to meet Colonel Tokaz's son. The other opportunity that has just been so rewarding to me is I've had time to spend with the actual people of the 57th Bomb Wing from the Mediterranean and hearing the real stories about the things that happened and what didn't happen. One of the funny stories that we just lost him here, but they're all in their mid-90s to mid-90s, and he happened to be one of the sheet metal guys that actually worked on our airplane. And we're having a good discussion, and he said, oh, by the way, he changed gears out there. He says, do you know who painted the nose arts for the 489? And I said, I have no idea, Mike. And he says, it was our barber. So he was a commercial artist before he went into the service and wound up with the 57th Bomb Wing and the 489th, and he was the person responsible for painting all the nose art that you see on those aircraft. But their families, the documents they have, they're so willing to share. They're so interested in looking at the things we have that they may not have. It's just the research. I just wish I was much younger and had this interest in the research. And I'll just say that the 25 is my passion. There's other aircraft out there, but the 25 is what it is, and can't take that away from us.
I beg to differ with you, Jerry. There's only one airplane out there. It's a B-25. I'm fairly certain of that. All right. Well, Allison, you've been pretty quiet.
And I love your commitment to authenticity and accuracy. The more that I do study and research, also the more I feel that we should only ever say, I am 90% or 95% confident that this happened, and so many historians do like the clearest level of research. Like if they saw it in a magazine, it's accurate, and you guys, you set the bar so high for all the other groups around the country and around the world. So we feel so lucky that you guys take an interest in us and care about one of our aircraft. I could only wish that there was one of like B-25 history projects for every other aircraft that we have, but you guys are too special for that. And I love the focus that you guys have as well on the ladies. Like the fact that you've had pictures of actual people and like we know their names, we know what they did. That's something that resonates with us so strongly as well. The unsung heroes, basically.
Yeah.
But also the ones who went out and did the fighting and all of the dangerous stuff.
Yeah,
Thank you for just doing all of this great stuff.
no, I appreciate it. Thank you. For those that don't know, and I know you know, but I mentioned that my grandparents worked at the plant, and back in 1988, my grandparents actually formed an organization, the predecessor to this one, that they had an annual reunion. We sent out a newsletter every roughly 3 to 4 times a year, and that went out to, at its height, somewhere around 900 people that worked at the plant. Obviously, by the time we ended it back in 2004, that had dwindled down to about 300, a little over 300. So I've got to meet a lot of all these people, and my passion actually develops from them because they're some of the, I mean, you know, just getting to know, you know, Jerry mentioned this too, just getting to know some of these people, and was honored to spend a lot of time, and I'm sorry, Dick's on my mind, but Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole was the co-pilot of the first airplane in the Doolittle raid, so he's Doolittle's co-pilot. He was just interred yesterday, day before yesterday, sorry, losing my time. He was a friend of mine, and I was honored to spend some time with him and get to know him and share quite a few drinks with him. But it's not just him, you know, it's all these other people too, all these people at the plant, just, you know, and their kids and stuff like that. And it's just really cool, especially when I talk about the Rosies that I bring. I have this one Rosie that every few weeks she sends me an email and says, thanks for giving me something to live for. You can't not appreciate, you know, you can't not do this when you get those kind of emails on a daily basis. Yes, it's Mary. Yeah.
Amazing. You guys are all amazing.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
We're starting to scratch the surface on is the history of the Pitt Ferry Group, which is stationed outside the Fairfax plant, the same area, and trying to uncover more of the history of the young women and men, most of these women of the WASP, you know, that flew B-25 to their final U.S. destination.
Yeah, which, by the way, Mike, I haven't told you, but I think I have a list of the first WASP that joined the 5th, but that's another story. Anyway, so...
If we could, maybe let the pilots, because
that's where I'm heading.
Both commercial background as flying the modern aircraft, and let them know why they have chose this wonderful World War II B-25.
I was going to do ladies first and head up to Delane there and have her say a few words. And
I'm sure. First, I want a list of that the wasp that flew.
We'll talk.
Yeah, that's important to me. I was on a WASP air show team commemorating a WASP. So we would bring a WASP to each air show that we were at as our guest of honor. And it was quite an honor to fly on that team and to meet all the WASP. So I definitely want that list.
It's okay. They've got a raffle. They want to draw a ticket to see somebody to fly with you real quick. Can we do that real quick, and then you can finish saying what you're saying?
What was that?
They want to pull a name out of a hat for someone to fly with you on the VIP ride. Can we do that real quick, and then have you finish up, and then we'll go to Mike? Yeah, cool.
Well, we can finish that luncheon in 5 minutes.
Well, it's your turn.
Okay, well, you're good, so we're gonna do the big drawing for the raffle. I cannot hold this, because I want to make sure everyone knows I have no control over who wins. So Jim and Dan.
Oh, wait a minute.
You can come up here.
I'm getting voluntold. Hang on, I'll be back.
So Jim, you hold the bag.
Oh, you want me to draw?
Yeah.
So it's my, okay, so now it's my fault.
Yeah, so it's Dan's fault if you don't win. So this is for you on the VIP ride when the plane flies in on Monday, October 4th.
I'm going to tell you if I draw your my name.
Your name's not in there.
Exactly. We don't count.
you can.
We're through. We don't have. I don't know if you want this person to win. Yeah, make it back.
Kent with, not nut packaging, Kent? I don't say it right.
American equipment.
American equipment, I don't know why I always think, I know American Equipment, Luann and Keith for years and years and years. They're great members and businesses in Fairfax, and so congratulations. I will send you the paperwork and we'll get you going. And then if you want to just wrap up, and then we'll wrap up here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, you guys don't.
I have a question.
We're gonna chat in a minute, but yeah.
If
please.
some of you want to stay and continue to
Yeah.
chat.
At the height of the production in Fairfax.
Yes.
What was the production rate?
The record was what, 310 in a month? In one month period is 310, so it's about 11. We'll call it 10 point something a day.
Right.
I just emailed you that stuff. I got an email from Allison who she wanted some stats, and I actually said, nobody's ever asked me for the details of all this other kind of stuff, so I had to think and do math. All right, so there's probably going to be some mulling around here because they're going to tidy up and leave, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop talking because I'm not done talking to you guys yet.
Sorry guys, one other thing.
Kevin, I didn't know nobody else asked for factory specifics. I would love any other number crunchy things, like number of ladies, number of men, any stuff like that.
We'll talk.
Yeah, maybe Dan do some more research. Please take these with you and hang them up at your business so your employees and anyone that is interested sees and gets online and buys the tickets. The tickets are on sale.
Can they hear this conversation like if Elaine
No tickets at the door.
Mike speaks, will they hear it?
Yes. Yep. We're all talking together. I think we were in the middle of Delane. Delane, did you have anything that you wanted to finish with there? I kind of interrupted you.
What's that?
No, I'm just really excited to get out there and meet you guys.
Oh, it'll be a blast.
Yeah, and I really want more information on the roadies that helped build the plane and the loss. Because that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, no. We'll talk, and you'll be here for a week. So we're already planning a tour. So it'll work.
Great. Okay.
They might want you to explain some of the things that are different flying a World War II plane compared to a modern commercial.
Yeah.